welcome back to Which is the Moon. I'm your Friday hostess, Natalie. And I apologize for the voice quality and grainy quality of this video. You are looking at my Morgan altar, which I have set in the center there, my skull with the raven, representative of my ancestors. If this is a little shaky, I apologize, and if I sound a little funny, I apologize there as well. It's about 5:45 in the morning. We are going to be leaving for Colorado tomorrow, which is Wednesday, so I'm having to record this in advance. But this week's topic is ancestor worship. And let me explain a little bit about my altar setup here. As you can see, obviously, it is full of ravens and crows. I am a follower of the Morgan, and as her daughter, I give honor to her always. So this is a permanent small altar space that I have set up for her in my home office. The skull in the middle, to me, is representative of my ancestors and that connection to deity that we all have. The Celts, in many ways, believed that they were descended directly from the gods and goddesses. I read an article by a gentleman named J. Craig Mill recently that talks specifically about the importance of the ancestors to the ancient Celtic culture, that even to this day many people try to keep some of those old places going. In that article, he told a story about a priest who wanted to build a new carport next to his place where he lived, and he wanted to use the rocks from a ruined building that was on the neighboring property. When he approached the gentleman about taking the stones, the gentleman told him no, and when the priest asked him why he wouldn't let him have the stones, the man responded, "Where would the souls of my ancestors go?" So obviously there is a deep history in the Celtic culture of revering your ancestors and those who have gone before. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about why this is so important to me. I grew up in a household that was, when I was very young, very tight-knit. We went everywhere together, we did things together, and then when we moved from Colorado to Texas during Christmas break of my 6th grade year, it was like throwing paper into water. My family just sort of dissipated. My dad became very involved in the Masons and in his lodge meetings and joined the shrine, and my mother had her mother, and so she was always there. She would come home in time to cook my father's supper, because he expected supper on the table when he got home, or he would pout like a child. And as my mother was with her mother most of the time, she didn't really care what we were doing. So my sister and I were pretty much left to our own devices. My sister, being 5.5 years older than me, didn't really want much to do with me, and so I was left very much on my own. So I think for me, ancestor worship has always been a bit important. I've always been very interested in my own genealogy, my own history. My father's aunt studied our history very intensely on that side of the family. It was not kept as well on my mother's side, but I do know that I have Celtic blood and Cherokee blood and Dutch blood on my mother's side. I have French blood and Celtic blood on my father's side, particularly Welsh. My grandfather, we don't know anything about my father's side of the family at all, except that he was adopted by his mother's second husband, and that he claimed to be 100% Welsh. We don't know much beyond that. I am trying currently to investigate in that, because it is my opinion that you are who you are because of your ancestors. That there is a little bit of that history and that tradition and being instilled within you, just within your DNA. And we need to keep in mind our ancestors at all times, not just at Samhain when the veil is thin and people are remembering, but to remember our ancestors in some way each day. And I think we do that in many ways with just our family traditions. You know, some people celebrate certain holidays certain ways. The way we do birthdays is often traditional in many ways, whether you have a certain type of cake or you do a certain thing a certain way. Each time you do that, you are honoring your ancestors, because you're recalling all of your family histories and all of your family's traditions. And I do think it's important to pass those things on to your children. But I think that we've lost, in a way, our understanding that that is our connection to our ancestors. And I think that's where we on this path, tend to be a little more reminiscent, so to speak. I think that ancestor worship, to an extent, exists all over, even in people that don't realize that they're doing it, simply by the keeping of those traditions. But I think that those traditions are mightily important in terms of being able to hang on to our family values, so to speak. Some of those values you may not want to hang on to, so in that point we develop new traditions for our own branch of the family, but that still holds pieces of our family history within it. And I think that it's very important to understand who you are and where you come from and who your ancestors were, because you are here today because of them, and a piece of them remains within you through your DNA, through your actions, through your words. If any of you have ever done any kind of family studies, you know that transgenerationally things are very strong, and you really need to be kind of aware of that, because there may be some of those traditions you do not want to perpetuate. For example, if you have a family history of abuse, that may be something that you need to be aware of transgenerationally so that you can put a stop to that. It's very important to know your roots, to know where you come from, to understand who you are. And also for medical purposes, I think that it's important to know your ancestors and be familiar with them, because I think you need to know what the family history of your medical, the medical side of your family history and the traditions that are related to that. Are some of the traditions contributing to a negative medical situation? There may be some need for you to honor your ancestors by altering those and continuing your line. Continuing your line is also, I think, a very good way to honor your ancestors. Not everybody is capable of doing that. Not everybody wants to do that. But I do think that that's another way in which we continue our family lines, whether we realize that we're honoring our ancestors in that way or not. So how can you honor your ancestors on a day-to-day basis? Well, simply offering a word of thanks to your ancestors when you get up in the morning or before you go to bed at night, for giving you the qualities that you needed to make it through that day. That may be a good way to do it. Perhaps journaling about meditations that you do regarding your family history, any genealogical research that you do, if you've done the DNA testing through Ancestry.com, or you happen to be on Ancestry.com. If not, maybe... Okay, I apologize for that. I was kind of cut off in the middle there. So, I was stating that ways you can remember your ancestors, various different ways, perhaps doing an ancestry search on Ancestor.com, being aware of that, keeping photos of your family around, also learning some of the recipes of your prior family members, your grandmother, great-grandmother, if you like to cook or bake. If you don't, perhaps finding some of the other things that they used to do and taking part in some of those activities. If they like to fish, learn to fish. If they like to golf, learn to golf. And do it just in honor. And each time you do that activity, think of that family member and try to keep in mind how important that activity was to them and how it is important to you to take part in that in honor to them. So taking ancestor worship into your day-to-day routine doesn't have to be anything elaborate. You don't have to have a big ritual or ceremony. It's simply recalling your ancestors on a day-to-day basis and thanking them for bringing you life ultimately, which they have, and keeping in mind their likes and dislikes and the family traditions that have been set up. So that may be an easy and simple way to bring ancestor worship to you. And I hope that you have a better understanding of why I personally feel that ancestor worship is important. It doesn't necessarily mean worship in the manner that most people think of the term worship, where you are seeing them as being able to do something for you, although they may be able to. We believe that the spirit realm is connected to the physical realm, as above, so below. So going to your ancestors and asking them for guidance may also be an excellent way. But I don't think it's like a Christian perspective of worship. For us, worship simply means to honor and to respect and to remember. And I think that that's important to keep in mind, that we do that sometimes without even realizing that we're doing it, simply by following through on actions that our ancestors have done. So by being more mindful of the things that you do, you can bring honor and respect to your ancestors. I appreciate you watching this video. I realize it's been a little short, and again, I apologize for the voice quality.